Thank you. My name is Erik Francis, and I am an author and a professional education specialist. I just wrote a book for ASCD called Now That's a Good Question, How to Promote Cognitive Rigor Through Classroom Questioning. And my big push, and I guess my passion, is how can we take standards that are highly directive and even commanding and turn them into open-ended, text-dependent questions that not only challenge students to think deeply, but also express and share the depth and extent of their learning. So what I do is I go around, and I wrote a book about this, and I go around to schools and do professional development and show teachers how they can create questions that'll challenge students not only to demonstrate higher-order thinking, but also communicate depth of knowledge, and also they can use these questions to set the instructional focus and serve as formative, summative, and authentic assessments for deeper student-centered learning experiences.
That's awesome. So how did this, in your classroom, this is where you realized it, right?
Yes, it is.
When was that? I mean, how long ago?
Oh my gosh, I think it was about maybe even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I used to be the great lecturer. I used to stand in front of the room. I used to wax philosophical. I used to say great things. And I was doing an author study, and it was on Mark Twain. And I said, Mark Twain was the original bad boy. And I went into this really, really entertaining lecture about it. And I got 90 papers back saying to me, Mark Twain was the original bad boy. And only one kid cited my lecture, so he got the A.
Right.
So what I realized is that my kids, they're just regurgitating what I said, and they're just mostly repeating factual information, and a lot of their thinking was not getting past the apply. The analyze and evaluate was hard to get to, and the create was completely misinterpreted because they thought if they designed, danced, draw, or performed, that they were being creative. So then I started asking questions. So I said, why does Mr. Francis call Mark Twain the original bad boy, and what influence has he had on satire and comedy historically and presently? Mm-hmm. So then my kids went out and they researched and they examined, investigated, and they created presentations and wrote a paper about his influence not only on satire historically, but also modern day comedy and satire, using examples like Bill Maher, Howard Stern, and such. So, and I basically would ask them, so who do you think is the modern day Mark Twain, and why? And now I got them really thinking. So what I also found was I was working hard teaching, and I'm the one standing in front of the room, and I'm the one on the weekends not watching football because I'm researching the information, I'm examining, investigating it, and I'm designing these PowerPoints that rival George Lucas and James Cameron movies. I'm doing a project-based learning. Right. And then when I get in on a Monday, I'm the one who's up there telling them what I know and what I learned. Right. Some are paying attention, some are responding, some are entertained, and still I had some on their phones texting or sleeping. And then I decided, okay, you know what, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. So what I did was the questions I would have to set up my lessons, I turned over to them, and then they taught me. So I would walk in the room, I could say something like, so how did Edgar Allan Poe create detective fiction mystery genre? And the kids all look and say, what? And I said, yeah, what if I told you that he created the first detective mystery genre, the first detective mystery story, and that Sherlock Holmes is actually based on that character he created? So now I let them use their phones, because we need to let them use their phones in the classroom. It's the library. Yeah. I mean, we used to have to go out to the library to get information. Now they have curriculum in the library right in their hands. And they would go research it and get the credible evidence and cite the credible sources that they got it. Yeah. And they're all actively engaged. And what I found was, through questioning, my teaching actually went down to a 1-to-4 ratio where I can spend the first day doing direct instruction guided practice, and all 4 days was all independent practice and facilitation through questioning. Right. So that's why I wrote my book.
Yeah. And so, and I see, and then you're like, okay, so now how do I tie this to the standards, and how do I make those standards easily more consumable for me and for the students?
Right. Yeah. Well, the other thing you think about a standardized test, it's a snapshot. Yeah. It's an item. They call them questions. They're not questions. They're actually directives. If you look, they really don't ask questions. And the questions that they do ask is a multiple choice question. So you're really just not even asking the kids. You're telling them to do this. And it's that day. It's like almost a sports or football mentality of any given Sunday. Yeah. Right. So you don't know what happened when that student came in that day. So if a student bombed a test, well, when I was a testing coordinator, my principal used to say, well, why did they do poorly on the test? And I said, I don't know, let's do a qualitative survey. How many kids didn't have breakfast this morning? How many kids' parents are getting divorced? How many kids just found out they're getting evicted? How many kids just broke up with their girlfriend or boyfriend? Or how many kids did what my friend did in high school during the SATs? He wrote his name down, got to 300 points, and then he saw his crush across the room, stared at her for 3 hours.
That's how you take the SATs.
Right. So it's a snapshot. So what I try to do with schools is turn that standard into a question and then use their curriculum or use their text as the evidence. So when I get a standardized test back and we say, oh, hey, 20% of the kids passed it, and the teacher says, well, I taught them, the principal should say, okay, well, turn that standard into a question, use our curriculum, and have them write out the concept and process using the curriculum as evidence. Now you have a new data source, and you can actually consider 4 things. 1, was that a bad item on the test? Because they're not all great.
Right.
2, is our curriculum and instruction lined up to the way they're being assessed on the standardized test? 3, why can that student apply it but not explain it, or vice versa? Or 4, what's going on with that kid? What happened to that kid that day? So we put too many eggs in our basket on these tests, and it's almost like a Super Bowl mentality, because as we all know, sometimes the best team doesn't win the Super Bowl, but they were the best team of the season.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, it's how you show up on that day.
Right.
All day by day.
Well, and you take into those different factors, and I think of a situation where I'm trying to keep this as non-specific as I can. I know of a situation where a group of students decided that they pretty much that day didn't care for the particular teacher who was administering the test they were taking. It was a standardized test. Frankly, I think part of the problem is that most of the standardized tests, they have no effect on the student whatsoever.
No.
They don't have to care about it. Well, then they get upset with a teacher and decide they're going to get back at the teacher, and so they blow the standardized test intentionally to get back at the teacher.
And that happens a lot.
Exactly. So now that supposedly reflects poorly on that teacher when it was absolute external forces that determined what answers those students chose. Basically, they randomly went through and went, yeah, I don't really care what happens here.
Well, there's no teeth to the test. I mean, some states now don't make the test a graduation requirement anymore. My own state, I'm from Arizona, my superintendent of public instruction has basically refuted the state test that was adopted by her predecessor. Sure. So what's the message that's out there? We're also benchmarking these kids to death.
Right. Sure.
And we're also relying on whatever question that assessment gives them is going to be that indicator. Well, that's like a batting cage mentality,
right?
Because it's not whether the kid can hit the ball, it's the quality of the pitch.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and it's just not a fair measure of learning. We need to take teaching back from the tests.
Yeah.
And it's just been completely over the last 15 years since No Child Left Behind. It has just completely made education, unfortunately, a miserable place. And teaching to the test, making sure they have basic knowledge. And think about this with a standardized test. What does standardized mean? It means you are average.
Right.
So why is it that we're all jumping up and down and putting up banners that our school is performing or highly performing, and the majority of our kids are meeting on the test, and we're going, congratulations, you got a C.
That's right.
But in our classroom, that's not permissible.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So we really need to bring back the joy of teaching and that's what the questioning does, is that you are really teaching them in a way to get the kids thinking and get them to go, I never really thought about that.
Yeah, well, and I think it's very important. A lot of the things that you've been talking about in terms of the questions that you've been coming up with the students and that you are helping other teachers come up with students are questions that you aren't going to be able to Google.
Well,
You can Google the research.
Right.
You can Google the information to formulate your response, but at least as far as I know, and I hadn't tried, but if I go out and I Google, who's a modern day Mark Twain, well, yes, I could probably Google that, and yes, there are going to be some answers out there, but then comes the critical thinking part. Okay, what are those answers? Who's telling me these answers?
Right.
And why do they say those answers versus how about the answer I want to come up with?
Right, and see, that's the interesting thing, because, unfortunately in teaching we go, this is good, this is bad. black or white, either or. Why not both? So, Google is a resource. We use Google. Everybody uses Google. The great thing about Google is that we don't have to memorize information like we did growing up.
Right.
For example, when we were growing up, you had to sit there and go, name all 50 states, and you'd have to go in alphabetical order. Alaska, Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona. So I just didn't do that in alphabetical order. But now you can just go and Google it and go here. But the important question is, how did the states get their names? What is the reason the square mileage of states is much larger as you travel further west? What if a state wanted to secede from the nation?
Sure.
Should smaller states like Connecticut, Delaware, and Rhode Island blend into the larger states, or should they remain independent states? What do you think should be the 51st state? What kind of plan could you come up with, a proposal to propose that this territory should become the 51st state, and why? Or should we even not have a 51st state?
Right.
And see, that's the thing. So Google, what we need to teach kids about Google is that it's a critical resource, but we need to think critically about those resources.
Right.
If you think about it, how many of you guys seen a depth of knowledge wheel? Okay,
Yeah.
It's completely inaccurate. It is completely inaccurate. Norman Webb even refuted it. How did it get out there, that DOK wheel? Because there was a Department of Education out there who Googled and said, is there a visual out there for depth of knowledge? They found the wheel, which was designed by a third grade teacher in Florida, okay? And then they made these posters, and then 45 other states said, well, what's other departments of education doing as part of their Race to the Top trainings? Here's this poster this state produced. So they all adopted it. No credible background or resource. And if you don't believe me, go to the link at the bottom of the poster. It's dead. It's dead. So what we should be doing with Google is teaching the kids how to think critically, especially in this age of alternative facts and fake news. And they need to understand that all the information on there is not true. So if I go to and say, who's the first president of the United States, and they start seeing some website saying John Hanson, which is sort of true because he was the first president of the United States appointed under Congress assembled in the Articles of Confederation. Well, you can't just trust Wikipedia, though Wikipedia is a place where you can go to narrow down the millions of hits, because now they have to cite credible sources.
Sure.
But you should look at credible sources. Constitution Facts, it's a credible page. The History Channel, it's a credible page. Tom's conspiracy theory about the presidents, probably not. So, but even so, I mean, I used to even teach with alternative facts and fake news. I used to say to the kids, I used to ask a question, I go, so why did Teddy Roosevelt organize the U.S. Department of Forestry? I said, don't you find it odd that a big game hunter would want to protect and preserve animals? And I said, well, what if I told you it's because he encountered a Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest and he lost track of it and he wanted to preserve animals that couldn't be found, that haven't been discovered yet? So the kids are like, no way. I said, go look it up. There's an actual story in Teddy Roosevelt's book from 1898 called The Bauman Incident, which talks about a fur trader who goes around, who talked about encountering an ape-like creature. This is in Teddy Roosevelt's own book in 1898, before we had the whole Bigfoot sensation.
Right.
My kids found that and they go, can we read that? And I said, if you can find a book, then go and read it. And one of my creative kids, he wrote a screenplay. He said, Teddy Roosevelt, Sasquatch Hunter. And the pitch was this. History tells us Teddy Roosevelt started the U.S. Division of Forestry for this reason. But this is the true story.
That's great.
And that kid's in Hollywood making films now.
Yeah.
So we can get stuff. You know, if you're teaching science, teach scientific fact and Michael Crichton science.
Yeah.
If you're teaching math, you know, if you're teaching linear equations, put it on a graph and then put Madden football up there and say, graph that play.
Yeah.
If you're teaching English language arts, don't just count on the samples that are in that textbook. Have the kids go out and read other works by Poe or by Bradbury or by Shakespeare.
Sure.
And that's what the questioning does, because I will ask them things like, how does Edgar Allan Poe's stories express his philosophy of composition? Well, that's not in a textbook. So the kids have to go out and read what's the philosophy of composition.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
That is very cool.
So you had a session yesterday. Mm-hmm. Same session today.
Yes.
Cool. Give us a little rundown of what we can expect. Quick summary of the session.
What we're going to go through is I'm going to show you examples of what good questions do. I'm not going to show you what is a good question because that's subjective, but what good questions do. And we're going to learn how questions can be developed from academic standards. We're going to learn how to create questions where the kids can actually make the vocabulary they need to learn by picking out the words from the standards that they don't don't know and understand, and phrasing it as a question.
Okay.
And really, more so, we're going to talk about how we shift our teaching from teaching like a sergeant, which is very directive, to teaching like Socrates, which is Socrates would ask the question, to teaching like Steve Jobs, because Steve Jobs didn't care about the facts. Steve Jobs cared about what can you do? How could you do this? So what that does is you're going to go from learning how to be, from being directive, from being inquisitive, to then doing driving questions for project-based learning or problem-based learning or STEM or STEAM, where you'd be like Steve Jobs saying, well, how could you do this? What can you design, develop, and do? What can you create?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That sounds like a great session.
That's gonna be cool.
Thank you.
That's a lot of valuable
that's
information.
coming up here shortly.
And it's based on my book from ASCD, which is called Now That's a Good Question.
Cool.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
What room are you in?
I am in D109.
All right, D109.
Cool. So for our listeners, this will be out on podcast, so we've got lots of listens after the fact.
Yep.
Wanted to find out more, we've got your Twitter handle. Website?
Website is www.maverick, M-A-V-E-R-I-K. There's no C's in Maverick. It's my name, and
Okay.
my daughter's name is Madison Avery and Amanda. And I'm also a child of the 80s, so Top Gun's my favorite movie. So, and it's really great because when I go in public, because they forget my name, they go, Maverick, you're Maverick. And I smile and put my aviators on. My kids are just, Dad, you're just eating this stuff, aren't you? And what's great is there's a sequel coming out for Top Gun. They're calling it Top Gun Maverick. So I can't wait to get that t-shirt and start promoting it. So it's www.maverick, M-A-V-E-R-I-K, education.com.
Cool.
Awesome.
Cool.
And we have the Twitter handle, and yes, we put it out there, but just for the sake, go ahead and
It's at Maverick, M-A-V-E-R-I-K-C-R-Q.
there you go. That is
Awesome.
awesome.
Want to thank you for stopping by.
Thank you, guys. I
I hope
appreciate
you had
it.
a great time here. This is a really nice institute.
Oh, it's been fantastic. I've been to Arkansas. I've worked with the school district out here. I presented their gifted conference. This is my third conference with you guys.
Okay,
and you guys are a really great state, and there's a lot of great things happening
It's
here.
a lot of fun. Going to ISTE?
No, unfortunately not. Conferences are interesting. Sometimes you don't get accepted, sometimes you do. I'm actually going to be presenting at the National Principals Conference.
Okay.
And I'm also going to be presenting at the National Association for Gifted Children.
Okay.
And I just found out this morning I'm going to be presenting at the Southern Regional Education Board High Schools at Work Conference in Nashville.
Awesome.
So,
Those are good platforms.
Yes.
Especially for your book and what you're trying to get across to the people that will be there. They can get that across to their people.
well, I think it's great you guys are doing podcasts like this.
Thanks.
I mean, that's awesome. I've been wanting to do one as well. So
Highly recommend
I'm
it.
going to keep in touch with me, please, and
absolutely.
I would love to, talk further and another time.
After the summer, we'll get you back on one of our regular shows on Wednesday, and we'll do some more talking, a little more time.
Excellent.
Get
Excellent.
more in depth about what's changed, because a lot changes over the summer.
Yes, very
our
much so.
downtime and our thinking time to get new ideas on paper and make it work.
Well, my big next push after questioning is depth of knowledge. That's hopefully going to be my next book.
Cool.
So,
Cool.
so yeah.
Looking forward to that.